Tiahleigh Palmer, a 12-year-old girl standing on the threshold of life's trials. Her ordinary teenage fate turned into a tragic series of circumstances. Her life path proved to be complex and dramatic, filled with painful challenges. The girl's biological mother was forced to transfer her to Child Protective Services due to a real threat posed by her husband, Trent. The woman was convinced that this decision would be the only chance to protect her daughter and give her an opportunity for a future. Unexpectedly, the kindness of strangers did not bring the anticipated salvation. The girl, whom her relatives still called Tia, was awaiting a horrific tragedy. Trent forced his wife Cindy to relinquish parental rights and transfer Tiahleigh to the foster care system. For Cindy, this was a forced decision. She considered it the only correct way to save her own child. Being a victim of domestic violence herself, the woman sought to protect her daughter from a similar fate. She had no opportunities for full child rearing due to destructive family circumstances. Tiahleigh grew up as a disobedient, impulsive child who often ran away from home to avoid witnessing parental conflicts. In January 2015, Child Protective Services decided to place the 12-year-old girl in a foster family in the small town of Chambersfield, located approximately an hour's drive from Brisbane. It was a typical Australian town with a population of about 2,500 residents. The new family for Tiahleigh became the Thornburns, family head Rico, his wife Julia, and two sons, 19-year-old John and 18-year-old Trent. By this point, the girl had already changed several foster families, as her difficult character did not allow for quick adaptation. Some considered her too conflictual. The Thornburn family was no exception to this rule. Tiahleigh was extremely dissatisfied with the prospect of living with two older teenage boys. However, she had no choice. At that time, the Thornburn couple, Rico and Julia, had been married for over a quarter of a century. The husband had previously worked as a large transport driver, but after a serious spinal injury, he was forced to radically change his profession. He founded a small fast food business using a mobile food truck and simultaneously maintained a small horse farm. Rico's wife, Julia, ran a home-based daycare. The Thornburn family was considered impeccable, respected, and exemplary in all social circles. This was precisely why Child Protective Services chose this family to place Tiahleigh. For 4 months, it seemed that the girl had successfully adapted to her new family. She was attending Morrison State School, located 20 minutes from home. Life finally appeared to have settled into a calm routine, her environment had grown accustomed to her, and she had made peace with her household. In reality, the situation was much more complex than it appeared on the surface. October 30, 2015, began as an ordinary day for the Thornburn family. Rico drove his foster daughter to school, after which he returned home and began repairing his own car. A few hours later, he received a call from the school reporting Tiahleigh's absence from classes. Such escapes were not unusual, the girl was accustomed to running away from problems. However, this time her searches proved futile, despite her typically quick returns or swift discovery. Rico posted on social media, carefully describing the situation and pleading for help in finding the girl. However, his appeal remained unanswered. The foster family knew about Tiahleigh's enthusiasm for Halloween, she eagerly anticipated the holiday and had even prepared a costume. Therefore, her sudden disappearance on the eve of the celebrations seemed especially strange. Soon, the family contacted the police, and the teenager was reported missing. In essence, almost no active searches were conducted, as everyone was convinced that the girl would soon return after another of her typical escapes. Less than a week after her disappearance, early in the morning of November 5, 2015, an alarming call came to the police. A local fisherman reported to emergency services about a horrifying discovery, a body found in the reed thickets of a shallow Pamplona stream. The location was approximately 30 kilometers south of Tiahleigh's last known location from a week prior. During this period, the body had significantly deteriorated, likely due to local fauna activity and the region's specific climatic conditions. The arriving law enforcement officers could not even definitively determine the body's gender, let alone identify the individual. They could only approximately establish the age as teenage. The body's condition induced horror and shock. Minimal clothing was present on the body, only underwear. Upon discovery, the body was immediately sent for forensic examination. By cross-referencing the finding with the list of missing persons in the area, the police hypothesized that this could be the body of 12-year-old Tiahleigh, who had disappeared a week earlier. Subsequently, the police version was confirmed by DNA laboratory analysis. The law enforcement's worst assumptions found their horrifying confirmation. During the examination, it was established that the wounds, initially perceived as animal bite marks, were actually inflicted by a human. 12-year-old Tiahleigh had become a victim of inhuman violence. The case was reclassified as a murder, after which a thorough investigation began. Considering that Rico Thornburn was the last person, according to the investigation, who had seen Tiahleigh alive, law enforcement initially focused on his testimony. From the very first moments of communication, the man aroused serious suspicion with his ambiguous behavior and inconsistencies in his statements. However, all versions required careful verification and documentary confirmation. The investigators decided to also interview other members of the Foster family, perhaps someone possessed additional information. Preliminary interviews with family members provided no substantial data. Everyone unanimously confirmed the family head's version that he personally drove the daughter to school at 7 in the morning. No one else had seen the missing girl. The next step was for investigators to go directly to the educational institution to verify the family's testimony. It was there that they managed to obtain fundamentally new information. Detectives conducted a large-scale interrogation. Over 100 people were questioned, including Tiahleigh's classmates, her friends, and teachers. An extremely strange and alarming fact emerged: no witness had seen the girl at the school that day, not even near the educational facility. Checking video cameras in the schoolyard and at the entrance confirmed, Tiahleigh had not come to school on the day of her disappearance, which raised additional questions. Where could the child have gone? During the investigation, unexpected testimony emerged from Tiahleigh's school friends. One of them told the detectives an extremely troubling story. The day before, the girl had begged her to take her home, claiming that terrible things were happening in the Foster family and that serious troubles awaited her. However, due to her young age, the friend could not independently decide to provide shelter. She did not comprehend the full seriousness of the situation. And soon after, Tiahleigh tragically died. The friend believed that these events could be interconnected. However, Tiahleigh had not detailed what exactly was happening in the Foster family. After additional questioning of other students, the police concluded that there were no obvious persons in the girl's immediate circle who could have harmed her. Suspicions towards the Thornburn Foster family continued to intensify, so investigators meticulously continued to check every detail of their testimony. The Foster family categorically rejected any accusations of domestic violence, claiming that Tiahleigh was simply inventing stories, as she had done in previous instances when she ran away and complained about other families. Law enforcement carefully verified the provided information and established that Tiahleigh indeed had a tendency to run away and was considered a challenging teenager. Everyone who was closely familiar with the family, as well as neighbors, unanimously claimed that this was an exemplary family. Many parents willingly entrusted their children to their private daycare, and none could believe that such respected people could have done anything bad to Tiahleigh. The vast majority of those around were convinced that the girl had simply run away and fabricated another story about mistreatment, and had actually found herself in a difficult situation and become a victim of an attack. As a result, the police had no substantial grounds for suspicion and effectively distanced themselves from investigating the Foster family. They also seemed to believe that this was a flawless family, so they began searching for the reasons behind the murder in other directions. Meanwhile, the Foster family continued to operate the daycare without any hindrance. During the investigation, detectives interrogated approximately 300 registered sexual offenders in the region who were suspected of possible involvement in a sexual assault, but this did not provide any substantial leads or the slightest hints about the circumstances of the teenager's disappearance. Most of those questioned had solid alibis, some had already moved away from the area, and as a result, no specific suspect was identified. On December 4, 2015, shoes that likely belonged to Tiahleigh were found 100 meters from the body's discovery site, along with her school backpack. This tragic story became so widely publicized that it instantly attracted public attention. Information about the high-profile case was broadcast on almost all Australian television channels, as a result of which the incident became known in every corner of the country. Before the funeral, several large-scale pickets took place, during which people demanded to find those responsible for the girl's horrific death, who obviously did not deserve such a fate. The biological mother of the deceased personally organized protest actions and persistently demanded detailed explanations from law enforcement regarding her daughter's death, repeatedly appearing on television broadcasts to draw wide public attention. The woman was extremely outraged by the inaction of Child Protection Services, to whom she had once entrusted her daughter. Partially because of this, over 600 people were present at the farewell ceremony, most of whom had not even known Tiahleigh during her life but came to pay their respects and sympathy to the unfortunate child. Many of those present were dressed in white and purple t-shirts with heart images and Tiahleigh's name. Purple was the girl's favorite color. Around 400 white roses were laid on her grave, and as the hearse departed, purple balloons were released into the sky, symbolizing farewell. 5 months had passed since Tiahleigh Palmer's tragic death, and law enforcement was still in complete informational uncertainty. To obtain any testimony, a cash reward was announced, an impressive sum of 250,000 Australian dollars, approximately equivalent to 160,000 US dollars. The girl's biological mother actively used media space, emotionally appealing to the public. She passionately implored possible witnesses to come forward and urged the perpetrators to confess. In addition to the large monetary reward, police guaranteed complete immunity from prosecution to any person who was not the direct perpetrator of the crime but would provide critically important information. Despite all efforts, gathering useful information proved impossible. The police received occasional phone calls from concerned citizens, but none contained substantial data for the investigation. Summer 2016 arrived, and the police still did not have even a probable suspect. Detectives methodically interrogated individuals previously involved in sexual crimes. The critical state of body decomposition made it impossible for forensic experts to obtain any significant evidence, so investigators could not even precisely determine the direct cause of death. The only expert assumption was based on a discovered fracture of the hyoid bone, which indirectly suggested strangulation. The most plausible theory of the investigation at that moment was kidnapping by a random motorist near the school, as the area where children were dropped off was not equipped with video surveillance systems, creating a potential risk zone. However, this remained merely a theoretical version of law enforcement. The reward of 250,000 Australian dollars designated for information that would help detain the criminal had still not interested anyone. Only in May 2016, after more than 6 months of exhausting work, an anonymous phone call arrived at the police station with unexpected information. An unknown caller assured that they had fundamentally important testimony regarding Tiahleigh and the Thornburn foster family. According to the anonymous source, the Thornburns had deliberately sought a problematic child from the beginning, as this provided an opportunity to receive increased state assistance. They demonstrated no emotional feelings towards Tiahleigh, having exclusively mercenary interests. Moreover, the interlocutor asserted with complete certainty the potential involvement of all family members in the tragic events surrounding Tiahleigh. However, the information ended there. The man suddenly hung up, providing no additional details. The identity of the anonymous informant could not be established, despite all attempts to obtain additional information. Considering the unexpected phone call, law enforcement decided to return to the version of possible involvement of the foster family in the murder. At the initial stage of the investigation, they had not paid attention to students' testimony about domestic violence in the Thornburn family. However, they failed to confirm previous assumptions, and the version was rejected. Now, detectives decided to focus again on the Foster family. During the verification of the anonymous witness's information, police conducted repeated interviews with school students. One of the victim's friends revealed shocking details about the relationship between Tiahleigh and 19-year-old Trent Thornburn, a local heartthrob. Due to her young age, the girl did not fully understand the nature of the relationship, sincerely believing it was genuine, as Trent assured her. She was even in love and fascinated by the horses on their farm. At the same time, Tiahleigh felt a strong fear of Trent and the entire family, which made her want to escape. Assumptions emerged about the existence of not only emotional but also severe physical violence against a minor. The student's testimony required careful verification, but repeated interrogations of family members yielded no results. They all categorically denied any suspicions, especially regarding sexual harassment of a minor. Due to serious suspicions, the Thornburns' guardianship permission was immediately revoked, and their foster family status was suspended. Law enforcement installed listening devices in their house, receiving shocking information daily that destroyed the image of a respectable family. In particular, they managed to establish a critically important detail. On October 29, 2015, the family held a family meeting on the eve of the girl's disappearance. During this meeting, Trent complained to his parents about abdominal pain, which caused serious concern and suspicions about the possible pregnancy of the 12-year-old girl. It turned out that the foster family had learned about the younger son's intimate relationship with Tiahleigh shortly before her disappearance. Trent contacted her exclusively during moments when other family members were absent. During the wiretapping, he admitted to having sexual relations with his foster sister multiple times. Their relationship had lasted about 10 months, practically the entire period of her stay under the Thornburns' care. Eventually, 19-year-old Trent approached his parents out of fear of Tiahleigh's possible pregnancy. He was panic-stricken about the disclosure of information about their relationship, understanding that the 7-year age difference essentially made him a criminal. The family head, Rico, calmed his son, instructing him not to worry. He will personally handle this problem. From the analyzed dialogues of the Thornburn family, it became evident that the underage girl experienced an extremely deep, almost panic-level fear of her foster father. Her greatest horror was the prospect of being left alone with him. It was entirely logical that such experiences were not groundless or random. Other family members demonstrated an equally pronounced fear and tension in his presence. Subsequently, it was confirmed that behind the family's outward respectability, an extremely dangerous and cruel personality was hidden. That evening, after concluding the discussion, Rick categorically expelled all family members, remaining alone with his foster daughter. When the rest of the family returned a few hours later as previously agreed, the girl was no longer there. Regarding her disappearance, the head of the family responded with extreme brevity: the girl had supposedly run away, and all problems with her were resolved. He even added a significant phrase about how she would certainly not tell anyone anything now. Family members immediately had well-founded concerns about a potential fatal scenario. They suspected that the father might have physically eliminated the child, being confident in her silence. When one of the sons attempted to check the girl's room, Rick stopped any such attempts with extraordinary aggression and threat. The atmosphere of fear was so powerful that none of the Thornburns dared to challenge him, and ultimately everyone pretended that nothing had happened. Soon it became absolutely clear: the story about him supposedly dropping off his foster daughter at an educational institution and her subsequent disappearance was an outright manipulation. In reality, he physically could not have done this, as Tiahleigh was no longer in the house at that moment, and most likely, she had already perished. The details of exactly what happened to the girl remained unknown. Rick carefully concealed this information even from the closest family members. During surveillance of conversations, law enforcement repeatedly heard him meticulously instructing those around him about what to say and how to behave to avoid arousing police suspicion, and everyone unconditionally submitted to his instructions. Law enforcement officers began investigative actions by interrogating the sons and mother, believing they would most quickly provide information. Gradually, relatives began to reveal more when detectives presented them with available evidence. The longer the communication continued, the deeper the law enforcement officers understood the true picture of events in the family. Rick had built an extraordinarily well-thought-out strategy designed to create an impression of his care for the family. By repeatedly checking recordings from external cameras of the educational institution, police were ultimately convinced the head of the Thornburn family had extremely carefully planned the crime concealment and prepared false evidence. On that fateful morning, he did indeed make a trip in the direction of the school, and his automobile was captured by several surveillance cameras. However, none of them recorded the slightest confirmation of the girl's presence in the vehicle. A devastating storm of suspicions and criticism immediately descended upon the Thornburn family. Julia and Josh were officially accused of providing false testimony in deliberate attempts to disorient the course of the investigation. Trent was charged with severe forms of violence, and Rick faced the most serious accusation of first-degree murder and intentional manipulation of investigative materials. According to investigators, the man not only deprived a minor of life but also deliberately mutilated the body beyond recognition, calculating how to make victim identification impossible. His brutal plan partially worked. In the initial stage, experts even found it difficult to determine the victim's gender. However, he failed to completely prevent the identification of the victim, especially considering the existence of modern DNA expertise methods, which he apparently was unaware of. Law enforcement officials had unquestionable grounds to consider Rick involved in systematic cruel physical and sexual violence against all children, including his own. In total, 9 diverse charges were formed against him, some of which were not directly linked to the murder. Trent was charged with particularly serious crimes, incest and intentional provision of false testimony. The family vehicle, which was discovered to have been urgently sold immediately after the girl's disappearance, was confiscated for expertise from its new owner. During the vehicle examination, criminalists discovered numerous blood stains. The entire scale of the accusations broke Rick's mental and physical health. On the day of his placement in the detention center, he lost consciousness. His condition was so critical that doctors were forced to keep him in an artificial coma. After several days in the hospital, he eventually regained consciousness. Medical personnel immediately suspected that he had intentionally provoked a health deterioration by taking certain medications. Fortunately, this individual failed to hide or avoid responsibility for the committed crimes. The Thornburn family consistently appeared before the court. The cynicism and cruelty of the act shocked the public so profoundly that people were literally outraged to their core. Society was almost unanimous in desiring maximum punishment for a family capable of such inhuman actions against a defenseless child. The accusation was so convincing and substantive that the defense side was practically not taken seriously during the trial. Julia and Josh, realizing the scale of what was committed, declared their guilt on all charges. Moreover, they agreed to serve as additional witnesses against Trent and Rick. The jury, without even resorting to prolonged deliberations, unanimously recognized that all family members were true social monsters, guilty under various articles of the criminal code. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel. Until next time, friends.